Hello all of you beautiful people, Jules here for WhatCulture.com, and I've got a very special list for you today because I'm going to be looking at the best wrestling video game for each major console. And the best part is that I don't need to be talking about all of the trash that the WWE games have been kicking out in recent years. No, we're focusing on the kings of the cream of the crop today. So strap on that ill-fitting singlet, my friends, grab the baby oil, set your hair to greasy, and let's headbang our way down to the ring to the best of the best over the last 35 years. As I'm Jules, this is WhatCulture.com, and this is ranking the best video game for each major console. Number 15, Sega Master System, WWF WrestleMania Steel Cage Challenge. Now for the Sega Master System, there were really only two actual wrestling games of note, and one was hands down better than the other. 1986 served up the vanilla Pro Wrestling, but that was followed in early 1993 by the infinitely superior WWF WrestleMania Steel Cage Challenge. Now to be fair to old Pro Wrestling, that was released a whole 7 years before Steel Cage Challenge and was focused solely on clunky tag bouts. The WWF WrestleMania Steel Cage Challenge, though, it had the benefit of being released towards the end of the Master System's lifespan, and that meant that game development had come a long old way since the console was first launched back in 1985. Now, it might not be much to look at right now, but it is hard to explain how cool it was for long-time Master System gamers to be able to take control of Bret Hart or Papa Shango and slap the ever-loving beef off of the likes of Hulk Hogan. It controlled well for the time, it looked great for the time, and has tons of replay value still to this day. Number 14, the NES, WWF WrestleMania Challenge. Like the Sega Master System, the original NES console also had WWF WrestleMania Steel Cage Challenge released on it, but unlike its Sega rival, the NES has a better game on offer than this one. And that better game was actually Steel Cage Challenge's predecessor, WWF WrestleMania Challenge. This was the first time where the glitz and glamour of the then WWF finally felt like it was truly brought to life. 8-bit life, admittedly, but brought to life nonetheless. For the time of its 1990 release, WWF WrestleMania Challenge featured a who's who of Vince McMahon's company. From Hulk Hogan, Andre the Giant, Ultimate Warrior, Macho King Randy Savage, Ravishing Rick Rude, The Big Boss Man, Hacksaw Jim Duggan, and Brutus Beefcake. Now, of course, you'd expect to see a wrestling game feature the biggest names of the day, but here, this was the first time that such a roster was assembled, and even if the in-game sprites weren't all that much to look at by today's standards, the gameplay, whoa, that still shines on like a diamond. Smash those buttons, my friend. Number 13, SNES and Sega Genesis WWF Raw. Both the SNES and the Sega Genesis, or Mega Drive for those outside of North America, had a fair few wrestling games that served well for the time. For the most part, the two consoles had the same third-party games land on their respective platforms, and that resulted in both the SNES and Genesis having the same answer when looking at the best wrestling game to grace their ranks. 1993 gave both consoles WWF Royal Rumble, but that offering just loses out here to the game that followed it a year later, that game being WWF Raw. Brimming with the neon vibrancy that 16-bit systems excelled at, WWF Raw's key appeal was in how it was more than just a fresh lick of paint to the WWF Royal Rumble game. At this point in time, games would take what had gone before them and just import a new roster as their main selling point. But here though, new moves were included. You could knock an opponent to the outside, and wrestlers were afforded their own unique attributes in a way not seen before. Additionally, this was the first time that intergender wrestling was possible in a wrestling game, with Luna Vachon able to battle her male cohorts. Number 12, Sega Saturn WWF In Your House. Now, just because a video game is listed as the best wrestling game that hits a certain console doesn't mean to say that said game is actually any good. Case in point, WWF In Your House. Released on the Sega Saturn and the Sony PlayStation, WWF In Your House is the best wrestling game that the Saturn can offer. Given that there were only a couple of wrestling games for the Saturn though, that is not actually saying all that much. WWF In Your House was a game that was very much a product of its time and awaiting that next stage of evolution. Mildly more graphically enhanced than the likes of WWF WWF Raw and WWF Royal Rumble, but not as advanced as later releases like WCW vs NWO World Tour and WWF Warzone, In Your House is a game that was essentially in a state of limbo. Still, the themed levels such as the Heart Dungeon or one of the Undertaker's eerie crypts at least gave something relatively fresh and new for the time. It wasn't great, but it was pretty good. Number 11, PlayStation, WWF SmackDown 2 Know Your Role. So PlayStation gamers had already got their own slice of wrestling brilliance with 2000's WWF SmackDown, but it's WWF SmackDown 2 Know Your Role which stands out as the best wrestling release to hit the original PlayStation console. The first WWF SmackDown was fantastic, yes, I know that, but Know Your Role was just, well, better in every possible way. From little things like giving wrestlers full entrances rather than just a video wall backdrop to major changes in game mechanics, Know Your Role was a complete home run. Delving deeper into an original story mode than its predecessor, WWF SmackDown 2 also won favor with gamers by having a detail creator superstar mode that allowed players to tinker with more than just preset heads, upper torsos and the like. By the time that all was said and done, WWF SmackDown 2 Know Your Role sold a ridiculous 3.2 million units across the globe, making it the best-selling combat sports game to be released solely on one system. These truly were the glory days of wrestling, but don't worry N64 fans, because you had your own delight. Number 10, N64 WWF No Mercy. The wrestling games of years gone by have admittedly been fun, but 2000 is the year when wrestling fans got the first truly great one. Now, said wrestling game is in fact one that would still claim to this day to be the best wrestling game, and say it with me kids, of all time, and that is WWF No Mercy. Released in November 2000 for the Nintendo 64, this was an offering that completely and utterly changed the game. With vastly improved graphics, a fresh storyline mode, and a creation suite like no other, No Mercy quickly became a must-play for anyone with even a passing interest in pro wrestling. It's not even an exaggeration to say that some people bought themselves an N64 solely to play No Mercy. Now, it has to be said that 1998's WCW NWO Revenge is also a great N64 wrestling game, but WWF No Mercy, which came from the same developers, Aki Corporation, took all of the elements that made WCW and NWO Revenge so great and just turned them up to 11. Number 9, Sega Dreamcast, WWF Royal Rumble. Not to be confused with its impressive 1993 namesake, WWF Royal Rumble was utterly erratic but undoubtedly enjoyable. As a console, the Sega Dreamcast is sadly just a footnote in the gaming industry. Sega's last foray into the home console market, the system was the first 6th generation console to arrive on the scene, but unfortunately for Sega though, the Dreamcast was soon left in the dust of the PlayStation 2, the Xbox, and even the Nintendo Gamecube. Wrestling fans were left with slim pickings to choose from on the Dreamcast, but WWF Royal Rumble is an offering that still has a special place in the heart of many a gamer, even if that's down to its outright hilarity rather than overall quality. Frankly, the main feature of WWF Royal Rumble, as in the Royal Rumble match itself, was an absolute mess. Due to the small roster of playable characters, you'd have the same grapplers entering the Rumble multiple times. But hey, it had a few things going for it. I mean, like the fact that this was the first time that Taz appeared in a WWF game, which I guess is something. Number 8, PlayStation 2, WWE SmackDown Here Comes the Pain. You know what, my friends? It takes something truly special to better Fire Pro Wrestling Returns, but being able to hitch a ride with a helicopter and then deliver an elbow drop from the skies definitely means that WWE SmackDown Here Comes the Pain manages to nab the top spot when it comes to PS2 wrestling releases. Now, to be fair, Here Comes the Pain has far more than just outlandish aerial assaults, with the gameplay, roster, arenas, creation suite, and all-round fluidity marking this out as a favourite of many gamers to this very day. While it's admittedly fun to pick up WWF Raw, WCW NWO Revenge, or WWF No Mercy, those games sadly feel all kinds of clunky nowadays, whereas Here Comes the Pain was just as beautifully brilliant as it's ever been. As for Fire Pro Wrestling Returns, don't worry, I'm not going to forget about that. That game was another fantastic PS2 offering, but one major reason that Here Comes the Pain just edges it out though is that Fire Pro Wrestling Returns didn't get a widespread global release until the PlayStation 3 had already launched. Number 7, Gamecube, Def Jam Vendetta. A wrestling game without any actual pro wrestlers? Technically, yes. But you know what? That didn't stop Def Jam Vendetta from being an absolute blast to bash your way through. Narrowly edging out the two WWE Day of Reckoning releases, EA Sports' Def Jam Vendetta took a bunch of legendary rappers and dumped them into a pro wrestling-driven environment. With players getting to fight their way through a linear story that jumps from fight to fight, the only way to be victorious over opponents is by pinfall, submission, or KO. Playing like WWF No Mercy but with rappers, the control system is basic but absolutely brutal, with it always being fun to wear down a body part before breaking a bone and making somebody tap out. And the fact that you've got the likes of Method Man, Ludacris, DMX, Ghostface Killer, and of course your own creator character, it is a swollen roster in all the right areas. Even now, Def Jam Vendetta is one of those games that many look back on with gooey eyes and fond memories, and you know what? It still holds up today. Number 6. Xbox WWE Raw 2 Ruthless Aggression. Much like WWE's Ruthless Aggression era, WWE Raw 2 was a game brimming with new kids on the block like John Cena, Batista, Randy Orton, and Chris Nowinski. A clear upgrade to its predecessor and better than its WWE WrestleMania 21 follow-up, WWE Raw 2 is the best wrestling game to be served up to owners of the original Xbox. What was unique about WWE Raw 2 was how it used a season mode to encourage players to fight for a spot on the game's Hall of Fame page. Gamers would play through a 12-month season of WWE programming with reward points achieved for ending each season with either the WWE Championship or World Heavyweight Championship around your grappler's waist. This game mode also gave players the opportunity to forge relationships with other wrestlers, and there was a sense of customization about establishing new alliances or rivalries as you guided your wrestler of choice on their journey. But if that's not your cup of tea, then just go to the Creation Suite, make a wrestler, and set the height to maximum. It is hilarious watching somebody who is so tall that their legs don't fully extend try and go around the ring. Love this game, it is mad. Number 5. Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 WWE 2K14. Much like how WWF Raw managed to tick the right boxes to be the best wrestling game on both the SNES and Sega Genesis, so too does WWE 2K14 hold the moniker of being the best wrestling game to hit both the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3. Now, truth be told, you can easily make the argument that WWE 2K14 has not been topped or at least equaled in the years since its release, because as it stands, this is probably 2K Sports' finest release of a WWE game. Gameplay-wise, moves were smoother, reversals were better, and players were rewarded for trying to lay an actual match out rather than just spamming buttons. But the biggest star of the show was the 30 years of WrestleMania campaign and the streak mode. Getting to relive some of WrestleMania's greatest ever moments was a fantastic touch, and likewise, getting to relive The Undertaker's Mania bouts was hugely enjoyable. Throw in the capability to have 100 created superstars and be able to import your own music, and you can see why WWE 2K14 is still so revered 7 years after its release. Number 4. The Wii. WWE SmackDown vs. Raw 2011. It's actually surprising how many wrestling games actually appeared on the Nintendo Wii, and while 2011's WWE All-Stars is definitely worth a mention here with its fun aesthetic, larger-than-life gameplay, and easy to pick up controls, it's just not as good as the absolute best wrestling game on the Wii, and that is WWE SmackDown vs. Raw 2011. What made this game stand out from its rivals was the extensive new linear single-player modes. You had the WWE Universe mode, which felt fresh and engaging, that let players embark on cutscene-laced story arcs in which meaningful decisions were at the gamer's fingertips. And then you had the Road to WrestleMania mode, which offered up multiple different possibilities as you tried to carve your wrestler's choice path into the WWE's annual showcase of the Immortals. The Wii came around at a kind of awkward time for wrestling games, with it too late to enjoy the brilliance of the early SmackDown franchise, while likewise being too late to get some of the better entries of the WWE 2K series. But WWE SmackDown vs. Raw 2011 was definitely a solid release across the board. Number 3. PlayStation 4. Fire Pro Wrestling World. The Fire Pro Wrestling franchise is one that's long been a favorite of those gamers who like their wrestling games to have a sense of believability and logical technical gameplay. Where Fire Pro has fallen down for some other fans, however, is how the series is largely a PC franchise rather than a console series. There have been rare Fire Pro releases for consoles over the years, and the response to those has been hugely positive, but those games have often been hard to get hold of outside of Japan. Fire Pro Wrestling World, though, was an offering that was made available on a more mainstream level thanks to getting a worldwide PlayStation 4 release. finally, after hearing so many great things about the franchise for years, more gamers were now finally able to get their hands on a Fire Pro Wrestling game. And while recent WWE releases have been average to, awful, Fire Pro Wrestling was a breath of fresh air for wrestling fans upon its release at the back end of 2017. Given the clusterfuck that was WWE 2K20, Fire Pro Wrestling has only put more pressure on future WWE games to pull the finger out of their asses. And Fire Pro Wrestling World is hands down the best PlayStation 4 wrestling experience. Number 2, Xbox One. WWE 2K16. Unlike the PS4, Fire Pro Wrestling World was never ported to Xbox One, and so the best of the bland bunch happens to be, well, I guess WWE 2K16. Because WWE 2K20, that's completely out of the conversation. And 2K Battlegrounds is okay, I guess. It's definitely not great. So that really only leaves 2K16. And it wasn't without its problems, but you know what, the game forever has an appeal to a certain generation of fans due to the 2K Showcase mode that allowed you to play through the entire career, that is from WCW to ECW to the WWF/E of Stone Cold Steve Austin. And that is worth quite a bloody lot. And number 1, the Nintendo Switch, WWE 2K Battlegrounds. The Nintendo Switch has actually only had 2 wrestling games released on it, with that being the, let's just say, abysmal 2K18 and this year's 2K Battlegrounds. Because weirdly, for whatever reason, they didn't get 2K19 and 2K20, although they could probably be thankful for that last one. And as for which is the best of the best between 2K18 and 2K Battlegrounds, that's definitely got to go to Battlegrounds. Not only is the game itself a better than 2K18 period, but the style and feel of Battlegrounds lends itself brilliantly to the fun and energy of the Switch itself. It's loud, erratic, elaborate, and all out bonkers for the most part, and that lines up nicely with the frenetic vibrancy that so many other Switch games so often serve up. I mean, let's face it, the Nintendo Switch is a system that's not necessarily designed for gamers who like to take things all that seriously, and that means that the eccentricities of 2K Battlegrounds is definitely a great fit. And there we go, my friends, that was ranking the best wrestling video game for each major console. I hope that you enjoyed that, and please let me know what you thought about it down in the comments section below. If you want to chat to me further, you can do so over on Twitter at RetroJ0, or you can swing by Live and Let's Dice. It's my personal gaming channel where I stream every single Wednesday and Sunday. Now go out there and grab that happiness, and I'll speak to you soon.